Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 5 coverage of my games from the Flying Man Swiss tournament, which was a tournament played at my local chess club. So these games are played at the relaxing time control of game in 2 hours with a 5-second delay, so a lot of time for the games. They were played one game per week, so the tournament was spread out over a 5 or 6 week period. I think there was one week where there wasn't any play. So it's an interesting way of putting together a tournament, a little bit different than the weekend Swisses that I have done before. And I play these all the time. I don't usually cover all of my games from one tournament, but this last game I thought was really interesting, and then I decided to go back and just cover all the games from the tournament, so you can see how the tournament unfolded step by step from my point of view. So just to give a little recap, in game one I played the Catalan opening against a higher rated opponent, and I played pretty well, but I ended up losing that game. Round two was I took a bye. Round three I was playing, had the black pieces. I played the Sicilian against a lower rated opponent. He went with the Alpine Sicilian, and that was not a good game for me. I got a little confused in the opening, and I made a pretty serious blunder in the middle game, but I did manage to win in the end. And then round four, my opponent just didn't show up, so that counts as a win from the point of view of the tournament. That's called a forfeit win. Although it doesn't affect my rating. So the only games that have affected my rating so far were the one win and the one loss. And so that's pretty much break even from a rating point of view. Anyway, from the point of view of the tournament, after 4 rounds, I was at 2.5 points. That's half a point for the bye, 1 point for the win, and 1 point for the forfeit win. So 2.5 points out of 4 means I'm doing better than average. And so I'm paired in round 5 against a strong opponent. And my opponent, oddly enough, is someone I have never played before. Although I've seen him, he's been coming to the chess club for a few years. So just by chance, I never got paired against him before. So it's my first time. And I have the white pieces. My opponent's rating, by the way, is 2,000. And my rating for the tournament is 1826. So anyway, I have the white pieces. I start off with e4. That's, my most comfortable opening. And when I want to play someone new, I just play e4 and see how they react to it. So he goes with the Sicilian again, and I go knight f3. I mean, we had a Sicilian in the last game, although I was playing the Sicilian that time, and he went with e6. So the e6, not the most common line in the Sicilian. A little more common is either d6 or knight to f6, but it's not unheard of. This can transpose into, or not transpose, this leads to the Khan Sicilian or the Taimanov Sicilian, most commonly. Anyway, I played d4, going for those open Sicilian lines. He takes, I take, and I place queen b6. So this is a move, I think I may have seen this move before, but I did not have any memory of what I'm supposed to play here. So just to show you the top choices here, the Taimanov Sicilian would be knight to f6, and the Khan Sicilian would be pawn to a6. So those would be your top choices here. And queen b6 is a bit of a sideline, but not unheard of. It's been played before. So anyway, it's a new position to me. If I had any memory of it, if I had ever faced it before, which I did have a vague memory that I might have faced it once before, but I had no idea what to play here. I had to think about it for a while. I mean, what I was concerned about in this position, if I just play something like knight c3, for example, he could play bishop c5. And this looks pretty strong here. Although maybe I could somehow get in knight a5. Yeah, knight a4. This line could go like this, knight a4 hitting the queen. This actually is a line in the opening book. You can play this way. Queen a5 check, c3, and it gets into complications. But it seems to be a playable line. And of course, if this knight moves away, then he can take here with check. So that's the problem there. So anyway, I didn't like the look of that line. Another line in the opening book is bishop to e3. And this is also one I thought about and rejected. But although apparently it's playable, queen takes b2 and then knight to d2. So the queen is defending the rook here. The rook's defending the pawn. So that's just a pawn sacrifice line. Let's see, black plays a6 here, I suppose, to stop the knight from, or maybe the bishop from coming there. I'm not sure. Anyway, Yeah, there's compensation for the pawn here, but I didn't know any of that. Anyway, the move I chose I thought was pretty logical. I dropped the knight back here to b3, and it covers the c5 square. So if the bishop ever comes out to c5, I can just trade it off. And it turns out that's the most popular move in this position. So just by looking at the alternatives and choosing what seemed like a good move to me, it seems like I stayed in a decent line here. So now my opponent went a6, and I went bishop e3. It just seemed pretty natural to me to try and chase that queen away and develop a piece with tempo. But that's not the main move there. Actually, we're out of the opening book at that point. If you think about it, he just played a6 here. And the book move here is bishop to d3. And then the queen goes back to c7. And now this setup is the setup that you get in the Con Sicilian. I don't know if this is called the Con Sicilian anymore because of the move order differences, but this pawn structure is what you get in the Con Sicilian. And the first piece move is often queen to c7. So the queen on c7 is where it wants to go. So if you think of it from that point of view, then bishop e3, he played queen c7. It's just sort of helping the queen go where it wants to go anyway. But it doesn't seem to be a serious mistake. It seems to be still fine for white. I mean, black is taking some liberties here with the pawn moves and the queen move. But it seems that black is okay as well. Maybe the best move here for white is g3. The chess engine liked that a lot. I played bishop e2. I thought I would just play with kingside castling and keep control of some of these squares. If the knight comes out, I don't want it coming in here. I didn't necessarily want to play f3. Sometimes you just double these bishops up here on the e-file and castle kingside, and it all turns out pretty well. Let's see. And he went, let's see, I went bishop e2. He went knight f6, attacking the pawn. And here I went f3. So, I like I said, I didn't necessarily want to play f3, but attacking the pawn, I was looking at the ways to defend it. I could have defended it like this, and then if he brings the bishop out, put this pawn here to block the bishop. But I wasn't quite sure if that knight really wanted to go to d2 or c3. The chess engine likes knight to c3 and bishop to b4. I didn't like this because of the pin. And then I might have to play f3 here anyway. Another option I could have considered was bishop to f3. That seems to be a fine move there as well. But I ended up playing f3 after all. And right here, black has a chance to pretty much equalize with the move d5. So d5, breaking in the centers, is often a classic way to equalize in these positions, and I haven't really done anything to prevent him from playing d5. I don't have the knight on c3 here that would be helping to control the square. I haven't had time to lift my queen up and castle queenside, which is another way to keep restraint on the d-file. So this f3 move allows d5, and let's see, after d5 the chess engine gives this line, knight d2, and bishop to d6, an interesting move. Trying to take advantage of the dark squared weaknesses that I created here, and maybe even just grab a pawn there. But my opponent didn't play that, so he kind of let me off the hook a little bit there. Although, like I said, that's just equalizing, so it's not like I'm in trouble or anything. But he went bishop to d6 immediately, and this is a very interesting move. And if you want to, you might want to think about this position for a little bit and try and figure out what you would play here. There is a threat. I'll just point this out. The bishop can just take that pawn, and there doesn't seem to be any way to trap it. So what would you play here? Okay, well, I'll pause the video if you want time to think about it. I played the move g3, and I did it somewhat reluctantly because this is creating weaknesses on the king side, and I had done this setup with my bishops here and here on e2 and e3, intending to castle king side, and but now my king side is weakened quite a bit, and he can pile up on that g3 pawn. He can bring the knight into one of these squares. Yeah, the knight from that square, or he can push a pawn forward. So it's not at all, it's not looking secure at all for me on the king side. But any other move seems to lose a pawn. The chess engine actually says white is fine after a move like queen d2. And after takes, just develop. Knight c3. He can even play here with check. So there was no way to trap the bishop, and he gets this check in, and the king goes to f1. And that's how the chess engine wants to play this. So white is a pawn down, and his king is on f1. The rook does have an open file. I mean, you're not castling and connecting rooks, but you have given the rook a way into the game, or it has a half open file, I guess. Maybe I can come up and harass the bishop or something. Anyway, an odd position. It seems like white has enough compensation for the pawn. Well, if you look at this, white has a tremendous amount of development. I mean, look at black's development here. And this bishop is not getting out very easily. It's blocked in by those pawns. So it seems like that's okay for white. But, well, it's a little hard to tell in a game like that. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting moment. So I played g3. I'm holding on to that pawn. And he goes ahead with h5. So this is the kind of play. You might think you only see this kind of thing in Blitz. But in fact, in over the board game, you see all different kind of styles. And obviously, the style of this player is just the very direct attacking style. And it seems like, well, given his rating and his standing in the tournament, I mean, he's at 2.5 points out of 4 as well in the tournament against some pretty tough competition. So obviously it's a successful style for him. I'm not going to criticize this, although technically these are not the best moves. You know, if you want to play like this, you can, but you're taking a lot of risk, is the way I would put it. So at this point, I realized there was really no defending the king side. There's no way I can stop him from just pushing the pawn forward and creating more weaknesses over here. And I decided I really did, at this point, have to go for just development. So I'm no longer worried so much about defending the king side over here, and I just worried about getting my pieces out to active squares. And I came up with a plan which actually meets the threats over here pretty well, I think. So, you know, if you want to look for a plan here, you can pause the video and think about it some more. Yeah, I'm going to give away my plan. So I start off with queen d2, which is the same move the chess engine had suggested a move earlier. He continued on with h4, and I just ignored it and played knight c3. And that was my plan. And the idea is that after he takes, I don't take back. I can't, actually. This pawn is pinned, right? This rook is loose here. And in this position, I castled queenside. So that was my plan. This castling queenside does two things. First of all, I defend the rook. So now it's possible for me to take on g3. And at the same time, I'm attacking his bishop. His bishop is only defended by the queen, and my rook and queen line up to attack his bishop. So I think this is a good solution to the problems I was facing there. And actually, the chess engine agrees. And black has a difficult choice here. It's actually hard to find a good move. He could try taking and just trying to go pawns up. But after f4, you know, I have some big threats here. And plus I can trade off this rook and round up that pawn without much difficulty. And I still have this big lead in development. I think black is momentarily 2 pawns up, but I'll get one of those pawns back. And my active pieces will more than compensate for the other pawn. So I'll be in pretty good shape there. The chess engine actually gives knight c6, so it's desperate to develop. And after e5, it will even sacrifice the knight there just to try and get something going. Or, well, the way it recommends white playing, though, is actually exchanging here and then leaving all these threats. So I think bishop f3 was the next move. Keeping an eye on this pawn without rounding it up and keeping this threat in the game as well. Just a good position for white. The best move here, apparently, is g2. And this is one of the ones I was expecting, one of the moves I was expecting. So rook h to g1 to block the pawn. And then just retreating the bishop to e7. That seems to be best play. But that means I'll be able to round up this pawn and I'll be in good shape with my better development. So that leads to an advantage to white as well. So there's just no good move for black here. My opponent tried bishop to b4, which is also kind of interesting. So switching gears, switching attention to the queen side and looking to inflict some pawn damage over here. So I went ahead and took. Now that my rook is defended, that was the idea. And also I saw that when we open up the H file here, this creates a dilemma for black. He probably doesn't want to exchange and give me control of the H file with the threat of the rook coming in here. And in fact, he didn't exchange. He just retreated his rook like that. So that buys me time. And I played the move bishop to f4 to harass his queen. And in a way, I was kind of provoking this move e5. But I thought this would, put a dark pawn in the center, help make this bishop not such a good piece. That was not entirely sound logic, I have to say, because he intends to trade that bishop off immediately. So I'm not so sure this was a great idea, that bishop f4 move. The chess engine is recommending g4 here. Sorry, g4. Which makes a lot of sense. g4 in these kind of Sicilian positions where you're going to harass this knight. This knight does not have a lot of good squares. So going after the knight with the pawn is probably a better approach in this position than what I played. So I played bishop f4, he played e5, and I repositioned my bishop here to g5. I thought this was a good square for the bishop too. And if he kicks it somehow, it's pretty safe there now. I guess he can chase it with the knight, then I can drop back to a square on e3. So after I played bishop g5, he decided to carry out his threat over here on the queen side. There was really nothing I could do about that. But I thought, well, at least I'll get the queens off. And although my pawns are weakened over here, my king is not going to fall victim to a sudden kingside attack with the queens off the board. And he still has these development problems over here on the queen side. So let's see, if we pause and count, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, the material is even. My pawn structure is a bit messed up, and black is way behind in development. This is actually a very strong position for white. White is in really good shape here. Anyway, he gets his knight out finally, and I play rook to d6. I was thinking, oh, this is great. So this is actually the first point in the game where I start to relax. It's like I survived the onslaught. I calculated that line with the queenside castling. I was feeling good about that. And maybe I just relaxed a little bit too much here. The chess engine would retreat the bishop to e3. But anyway, this looked like a good move. I'm ganging up on this knight. And and he's got to move his king to protect it, which he did after some thought. He spent some time thinking here, and he ended up playing king e7, because walking into a pin like that is a bit of a uncomfortable situation. But he is hitting the rook, and then my plan was to play rook to d1, defending my rook. And I had kind of calculated this move in advance, so I played that kind of quickly, even though my opponent spent a long time thinking here, and then played his king up. So his next move he played quickly. He had obviously been expecting this move, and he had a counter tactic. So if you want to check your tactics radar here, can you see what tactic he had been planning? Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. He played the move knight to knight to d4. So it was a very surprising move. I wasn't expecting that at all. But it's an interruption tactic. It interrupts the defense of my rook. So now my rook is hanging. And I can't just save the rook, like move the rook away, because he can take here. This is a loose piece. So it attacks a loose piece, and it also undefends the rook. So I now have two pieces hanging. And so I was kind of shocked by that move. Well, time to wake up and start looking at the tactics here. But the question here is that really such a great move? I mean, white has a number of responses here, and this is a very interesting tactical situation. So, and there's plenty of time. We're only on move 19 in the game, and we've been moving along at a fair pace. So each of us still had more than an hour left on the clock. So lots of time to think about this position and look for the best move. So can you find the best move for white here? And there's more than one good move, actually. White has a couple of good moves, but see if you can figure out as much as you can about this position and find the best move. Okay, pause the video here if you want to think about it. I'm going to start giving the answer away now. So if you said rook takes knight, that is one of the good moves. But there's one point you have to see here that I missed. And that is after pawn takes rook. I calculated this line when I was thinking about it. I took my time and thought about this position for a while. But I was just automatically taking back there in my head when I was calculating that. But the move here is e5. So that's the point of taking there. I actually get 2 pieces for the rook. Instead of being down the exchange, I'll be up in material with 2 pieces for the rook because his knight is still pinned. And if you look at it, going back to this position, when I take with the rook, he has to take back with the pawn, and that frees up this pawn to come forward. And that's the part I didn't miss. I assumed that rook takes, pawn takes is the way it would go, and I would be down the exchange for a pawn. And so I miscalculated that line. But it turns out that's not even the best line. I think also, by the way, this rook taking the knight also works. It's also a good move. If you came up with that one, that's a good move too. But you had to see this idea with e5 hitting the knight. That's a key point there. Anyway, the strongest move here is actually neither of those. The strongest move is pawn takes knight. And this move I thought about a little bit, but I once again I did not calculate very far. But this is a very forcing move, right? He's got to take the rook, because otherwise he's just down a piece. And then I take here, and it's a double check. The rook is checking the king, and the pawn is checking the king. And the king really should go back here, at which point I win the knight, and I get 2 pieces, 2 pieces for the rook again. But I think when I was calculating this, I just thought, well, he takes here, and what's the problem? I'm down the exchange. But I should have thought a little more deeply. You know, this is the kind of position, when you see it in your calculations, you should think, you know, what is the king doing in the middle of the board? And is there some way I can exploit that? So this is the strongest position that white has. In fact, there's a mate in 3 here, which is not so easy to find, but if you want to look for it, you can pause the video here and check it out. Okay, the hard part, I'm giving the answer away now. The hard part about finding the mate in 3 here is the first move is not a check. It's this move here, knight to c5, just keeping the king from retreating. So the rook cuts off all the retreating squares over here. The pawn and the bishop are cutting off all the retreating squares on this side. And in fact, the move f4 here would be an immediate mate. He has to take. And then you can take back. And then no matter what he plays here, there's a mate coming. So the chess engine gives a5. It doesn't matter what he plays. He has no move here. Rook to d5 is mate. So it was a mate in 3 there with the king in the middle of the board. But, well, even if I hadn't seen the mate there, you know, I had calculated ahead this far. I should have just thought for a second that there's probably some way to exploit the position of the king. But anyway, so I did not play either of those moves. I played the move, let's see, he played knight d4, and I played the move knight takes d4. Because I saw that after he takes the rook, I once again get a double check with the rook and the knight. The knight goes here or here to create a double check. And I was thinking that looked pretty good for me too, but it's not as strong as those other moves, and in fact it gives black a chance to play on. Let's go back to this position. So this is a position I had on the board, and I did think about it for quite a while, but I did not think deeply enough in a couple of critical lines, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this move and just verifying that it worked and calculating ahead as far as I can, but I should have spent more time thinking about those other moves. In a complicated situation like this, when you have the time, you shouldn't just focus on one main idea, but you should look around for the other ideas and see. Well, I did spot those ideas. I calculated up maybe one or two moves ahead, but I didn't see the follow-up moves. I didn't see the idea of pulling the pawn away and pushing this guy forward, or trapping the king in the middle of the board. A couple of cool ideas there. Anyway, not the best move, but I think this leads to about an even position, actually. I get compensation. I end up being down the exchange here, but I get some compensation here. So he takes, and I play knight to f5 check. And the king has to run. And this is what I liked about this move. There's only one move that the king has. If the king goes here, I've got a fork, picking up the rook. If the king goes here, I have rook here, and it's a checkmate. The king can't go here. He can't go here. If the king goes here to this square, then I check with the bishop, and that drives, notice my bishop is covering these squares, it drives the king back to that square, and I have the fork again. So the only move the king has is king c7. Of course, when your opponent only has one move, they're likely to find it. He played king c7. And then I was looking for a tactic here. Knight to d6 is an attractive move, and actually the best according to the chess engine. And that's, I'm down the exchange, but I have kind of a bind on the position, and seems to be around equal. I played here. I thought, well, let's get back a pawn. And once again, I had a particular variation in mind. I thought, well, if he takes the knight, I'll take here. And now notice he can't take here because I will take this pawn with check and pick up the rook. So he has to move his rook away, and at least I get this pawn. He had no way of protecting that pawn. And I was thinking, well, this is a pretty good position. I have a rook, two bishops, and these pawns here, maybe a passed pawn over here on the king side. And this is, in fact, a good position for white. But after I played knight takes g7, he has another move here. And this move leads to about an equal position. So he's got a skewer here. So in most places where I move the knight to, the bishop is hanging. And so the knight is kind of pinned. I mean, I could move the knight here, but that would defend the bishop, but it would lose the knight. So anyway, he can exploit the pin by playing knight to h5, which is the best move, and it is the move he played. So now I just have to take the knight. And then he takes here, and I don't have the bishop pair anymore. I have bishop and knight. So I'm down the exchange. I do have a pawn for the exchange, and this position is still okay for me. I think it's still playable. I push up here with f4, and he takes once. And notice when I played f4, my bishop was defending the knight. And then he played rook to c5. He could have tried rook to g2. This was an idea here. But then I was going to play bishop to c4 and start ganging up on this pawn, and look to push my pawns over here on the king side. Let's see. The chess engine actually plays the move d5 here as a way to give up material and get this bishop out. But well, this has a particular point. It's not just giving up material. So if I take here, he has the fork. So I have to take with the rook, and then he can play this move and get some material off and open up a line for his rook. And that seems to be okay. All this seems to be okay for both sides. Let's see. He played the move rook to c5, which stops me from playing this bishop to c4 move. So it has some value there, and it also threatens to take the pawn on c3. So I found a nice move here, I think. If you want to take another quiz here, the chess engine agrees this is the best move in the position. What's a good move here for white? Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. I played the move knight to f6. So the idea here is just simply, if he takes the pawn, the knight comes here with check, and I get the rook. So this move defends the pawn, and it gets the knight away from the edge of the board, gets it back to an active square. So That's an example of what Capablanca liked to call the petit combination, the little combination. It's a way to just improve your position a little bit by relying on some short-term tactics. And it can be very effective in certain positions, and this is a good example of it. So anyway, he dropped his rook back to c6, attacking my knight. I played e5, just cementing that knight in position. And, that's a very good piece here. At this point, he said, he told himself, I guess, he didn't want to live with this knight on the board anymore, and he gave back the exchange. He played rook takes knight, and I took back. So now I'm a pawn up, actually. We're in an endgame with rook and bishop. I'm a pawn up, and I have better development, but my pawns are horrible. I'm not going to be able to hold on to all of these pawns, and he's going to get his pieces out very quickly. So this position is probably close to even here. Let's see, he played d6 so he can bring his bishop out. I went bishop to f3. I was thinking, get some pin going on this pawn. But he just ignores that and plays bishop to e6 and attacks this pawn over here. And at this point, I didn't really want to be defending that pawn with my king. I wasn't sure if it was time yet to start moving that pawn forward. So I decided to block his bishop like this. So this is an okay move. Let's see, he played rook to g8. He's activating his rook. So now all the pieces are in play. And I played c4. So c4, defending the bishop. I wanted to, basically my idea here was I wanted to get the rook here so I could threaten to take this bishop and grab a pawn there. But I couldn't move my rook away while my bishop was hanging. The chess engine would actually just trade here, and then allow, let's see, rook to h1, allow black to get its rook in front of the pawn, and this position is probably about even. It's hard to say how I would ever make progress. I'm defending this pawn from the side, but he can probably manage to bring his king over somehow. I don't know. It's hard to see how either side would make progress in this position. Anyway, I wasn't doing that. I played c4, and he went rook to g6. So rook to g6 actually walks into a tactic and gives me one last chance here. And so if you want to see if you can spot the tactic, here's another opportunity for you. Okay, I played the move. I'm giving the answer away now. I played the move f5 here. I did not see the whole tactic, but I saw the first move. So f5 just drags his bishop away, and my idea was to take here, and I did. But there was an even better move right here, which was rook to f1, hitting the bishop. And you ask, well, why is this so good? Well, the first point is if the bishop just drops back, you can trade it off. And that pawn is queening. That's a killer pawn there. If the bishop goes anywhere else after rook f1, then you can just take this pawn, and you're hitting the rook, and you've got your rook behind a passed pawn. That is also winning, or leading to a pretty big advantage. Best play is rook takes f6 here, actually. Let's see. After rook f1, best play is rook takes f6, getting rid of this dangerous pawn, which is about to become a passer, and defending his bishop. But now his bishop is pinned, and I could play bishop to e4, and I'll be a piece up for a pawn. He'll have a passed pawn, though. It's not clear. I mean, so white has the advantage after that and should play for a win, although black maybe still has drawing chances. So anyway, that would be best play. But I missed this rook f1 idea. I had calculated when I played that f5 pawn push that gives me this pawn here, and it does. But after this, the position is just a draw, and neither side makes a mistake after this. So that's how the game ends. I'll just go through the remaining moves. He tries to keep his pieces active and prevent me from getting too active. Eventually he decides to trade there. I took back with the rook, It's possible to take with the pawn. This is also maybe a draw. Yeah, well, it should be a draw as well, but it gives him some play. He can bring his king up here and his rook here and attack that pawn. I can defend it like this. It just gets a little bit awkward. It's actually a simpler win or simpler draw to just take with the rook here, keep the rook active and keep his king out. Let's see. He played king c6. I'm just going to step through these moves. I played c3, shielding my king from checks. Tried prodding with his rook. I didn't want his rook coming and checking from behind, so I brought my king back. So he shuffled his rook around. Let's see. I didn't want to deal with rook here and trading and giving him a passed pawn there, so I just dropped my rook back. He played here, check. I moved my king up. He played here. I moved my rook up. Played here. I moved my rook to the side. And he offered a draw at this point, and I accepted it. So that was the final round game. And after 5 rounds, I have 1 win, 1 loss, 1 draw. But since my opponents are all higher rated, I will pick up a few rating points. So in the previous video, I showed how my rating had been on the decline. So this at least will halt the decline for 1 tournament. And maybe I can build on that in future tournaments. I was pretty happy with my play in this game overall. I think I responded well in the opening. I handled his aggressive attempts to get an attack going pretty well. I went for development at a key moment, and that was, I think, the right decision. And in the middle game, in the complications, I missed the best move there to turn this into a win. But there was really just that one point in the game where I didn't find the best move, even though there was, or I should say best moves, because there was more than one opportunity there. But well, it was complicated. I did calculate for a while, but also after a tactic like that, you're sometimes a bit unnerved. But I found a line that was playable and continued on the game. I found some nice moves in the end game, I think, to keep it going. And just ended up in a draw. So it was a lot of fun playing the game, I have to say. I enjoyed that a lot. Hope you guys enjoyed this series, and I will see you later. Bye.